Many councils in the UK are forced to declare bankruptcy, and steady cuts to funding from Westminster have plunged them into an unprecedented crisis, and there doesn't seem to be a solution in sight. So literally in England the lights go out, one after the other, street after street, and the reason for this is that many municipalities simply no longer know where they can get the money to light their citizens' homes at night. Of course, LED lamps and dimmed lights have been around on the island for years, just like in other countries. Wherever energy can be saved, energy is saved as much as possible. But now in some places in Great Britain, there is no longer enough to meet the minimum lighting requirement late at night. Residents of so-called quiet districts and rural areas are protesting indignantly against the fact that their local councils are gradually turning off their lights. The local governments, however, don't know what else to do. They have already closed libraries and youth centers and also closed a number of sports facilities. 400 municipal swimming pools have been closed in England since 2010 because there is no longer enough money to maintain them. Countless halls, parks, local bus services, small theatres and art galleries have ceased operations during the same period. At the same time, 60% of all public toilets have been closed as well. And we hear more and more often that rats have become a nuisance because people are trying to save money on pest control locally. Even cities like the venerable Canterbury, the seat of the Anglican Church, have recently had to contend with such problems. In the Welsh capital Cardiff, household waste will now only be collected every 3 weeks instead of weekly. In Stirling in Scotland, the garbage truck now only arrives once a month. And what's going on at the UK's communal grassroots here? 9 municipalities have declared bankruptcy in the past 5 years, and 5 of them, including large cities such as Birmingham and Nottingham, in the last year alone. A fifth of all municipalities are expected to face the same fate in the next 2 years. And large cities like Bradford, but also rural areas like Somerset, are on the list. And that's no wonder. The total debt of local governments has reached almost £100 billion. The main reason for this situation is that since the beginning of the rigid austerity policy under the then Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron in 2010, government subsidies to municipalities have been steadily restricted. They are said to have fallen by 40% since then, taking inflation into account now. However, the communities depend on these payments just as much as they rely on local taxes. Some areas such as Great Yarmouth in the east of England or Hastings in the south coast have just half as much money available today as they did at the start of the 14-year Tory era. The Conservatives have been hitting communities with a sledgehammer for more than a decade. There was a complaint by Angela Rayner, vice chair in the opposition Labour Party. The government, on the other hand, sees the communities as responsible for the plight. Some, says Michael Gove, the minister responsible for local government, have embarked on disastrous investments and dubious commercial adventures and thus wasted money senselessly, he says. In fact, it was Cameron's government that urged local authorities to invest in the private sector, because Cameron and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, wanted to cut grants to local authorities and thus cut their own spending. Concerned Conservative city and district administrators also admit this today. The current government under Rishi Sunak, which is heading towards a new phase of austerity, has found it fitting to accuse local politicians of incompetence and mismanagement, and in particular to brand Labour-held cities as scapegoats in the political game. If local authorities raise council tax in desperation, they will make themselves unpopular, and some are now planning record-high new tax rates in a panic. They simply replace central taxation with local taxation, says Stuart Hoddinott from the renowned Institute for Government. It is the same tax burden on individual citizens as it would be if there were a state tax increase. It just becomes a burden for which local councils can be held responsible instead of the central government. It allows the Chancellor of the Exchequer to cut taxes by so many percent in the budget statement, which is why the Finance Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, recently did that again. Civilities under severe pressure have been suffering from government cuts for years, says Mike Short from the Unison Union. But the pace of cuts has multiplied recently, and now the local authorities have far fewer resources than before. Even in the royal borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, where the royal family lives, they no longer have any money to support local cultural institutions and hope that rich ones, so patrons, will help out. Most experts consider the fact that Minister Gove has now promised to communities an extra £600 million to mitigate hardship cases to be insufficient. A cross-party committee of representatives has calculated that at least £4 billion would be needed. And local politicians believe that twice as much is necessary to avert further bankruptcy declarations. And instead of giving in to such demands, Prime Minister and ex-investment banker Sunak advises municipalities that are in a tailspin to quickly sell municipal assets and take radical privatization measures. After all, the government argues England's local authorities alone have £23 billion in material assets. In fact, dozens of local and regional authorities from the city of Leeds to the county of Kent have now drawn up lists for possible fire sales. City halls, libraries, sports stadiums and existing public swimming pools are also among these rejectable objects, as are city-owned apartment blocks. In Birmingham, the mighty Alexander Stadium, which will host the Commonwealth Games, which hosted the Commonwealth Games in 22, and the impressive 10-story City Library, which opened just 10 years ago and cost £190 million, have already been added to the list. And they're also thinking about selling the Municipal Museum and Art Gallery, a number of valuable old buildings and various properties, and if necessary, even the city's historic town hall in Victoria Square. And there's more trouble there than that. Because Jeremy Hunt, we talked about him, he also made it clear that Thames Water must bear responsibility for its own financial difficulties. Hunt stressed that it's not the job of the government to protect investors from the consequences of poor decisions by management or owners. It would be completely wrong for consumers to have to pay for mismanagement within Britain's largest water group, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer said. And the comments came during Hunt's visit to Washington for the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. Thames Water, which supplies water to 15 million people in southern England, may face a complicated debt restructuring or even temporary nationalisation amid public anger over sewage spills and loss of confidence in England's privatised water system. Hunt pointed out that Thames Water had to solve its own problems, as I said, and the British government would never guarantee investors that the state will protect them from the negative consequences of bad business decisions. That's the nature of markets, as Hunt said. Hunt declined to say whether Thames Water could be placed into special administrative proceedings, but he stressed that the Treasury is preparing for all possible outcomes in such situations. The minister underlined his aim to protect investments to ensure resilient water supplies and clean rivers, while bill payers should be treated fairly. Clean rivers? At the same time, Hunt defended Britain as an attractive location for foreign investment and said there were important lessons to be learned from the difficulties of public monopolies such as water companies. The company, which is in a protracted conflict with industry regulator Ofwat, faces resistance from investors who reject the regulator's requirements. This led to a default by the parent company this month. With a debt load of £18.3 billion and whose shareholders include Chinese and Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds, as well as Canadian and British pension funds, Thames Water faces significant challenges. Owners last month expressed willingness to accept an estimated £5 billion loss as they ruled out additional equity injections. Thames Water needs billions of pounds in new funding to keep it running and overhaul its aging infrastructure. The company is seeking approval from Ofwat for higher customer bills, relaxations on dividend payouts, and more leniency on penalties for service failures. And that is quite ridiculous here when you think about in what state the rivers are because of companies like that in Britain. I'm quite glad about our strict regulations here, especially in my area, which are not much different from other places. But I have very clean water around here, and that even includes the canal where ships are driving all day, but that water is still in extremely good swimming conditions. Of course, where the ships are driving, you shouldn't swim, though. But I'm talking about the water conditions there, and that's why it's so unbelievable what I see. But our water company is owned by our municipality. But even if it weren't the case, this is one of the worst cases where you can see that there are some public services that should not be handed just by dividends. And I'm with Jeremy Hunt here. They shouldn't put money in so that they can still get dividends. If they are making losses, there shouldn't be any dividends. That's the first point. And the other thing is they have to do their job first. And Ofwat, if they demand them to do their job better. We have talked about the situation of the water qualities in Britain for a long time now. They are definitely not doing their jobs. And if that needs to be naturalized again, so be it. There are cases where this is important. And in some cases, and we're talking about what Sunak's government said about privatization here, there are things the state should do, and there are things that the market should do. But what a state shouldn't do, especially what a city shouldn't do, is selling all their assets. Because if he's a former investment banker, he should know a little bit about finances. If you have no assets anymore, every time you need to get a credit for something, and cities will always need that, the interest rates will be immense. My city here where I'm living is doing a proper thing. They are not selling any more city assets. In a few cases, my city is selling land for a certain purpose. That's for building homes and building houses for a lot of families. And then we're selling it to an investor to build those houses under the very strict conditions we set up. But the assets of the city are not being sold. And that is the important part. Because you are running into debt much easier if you don't have assets anymore. But that's a complicated thing. I am, especially as a non-native speaker. In German, I could explain it very, very clearly, but that's really too complicated to just speak it out of my mind for the English viewers. That's why I always have scripts running on their teleprompter, because I have to write that first, before, especially in the complicated parts. But nevertheless, Sunak should know better than telling the cities to sell their assets. But if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.